So I'm going to introduce now Arne Johan Vetlesen, who is a professor of philosophy at the University of Oslo. He concentrates on the topic of ethics and social philosophy. He took the CanMag, similar to BA, degree in sociology and anthropology before studying at the Johann Wolfgang Goethe University in Frankfurt am Main from 85 to 90. And he did his philosophy degree at the University of Oslo in 1993. I first met him through his studies of Hannah Arendt, me personally, and also I'm an eager reader of his columns in Klassekampen, where the past years I've, with increasing interest, read his kind of, I don't know if this is right to say, but kind of more and more angry response to the climate change and the non-political, that there is no political actions. That's my way of saying it, but a very warm welcome to Arne Johan Vetlesen.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me, Lotte. This is, of course, a very serious topic, and also a very broad and comprehensive one. I would like to start by not showing the picture of James Hansen giving testimony in the US Congress in August 1988. So I never have slides, but now we have Jim Hansen up there, and you have all seen his picture. He has since been, for decades, the head of NASA, and he's a leading science or climate scientist, a physician, ever since. And since he resigned from his position as head of NASA, he has become an activist. In 1988, which is of course 30 years ago, James Hansen warned as a scientist of the dangers that this new phenomenon that he then had to explain to Congress, climate change, would involve if not stopped, if not halted. This would develop into a very serious problem. Yeah, that was 30 years ago. What has happened since? Many of Hansen's warnings have become or are about to become true. What was until relatively recently estimates, scenarios for the future, have now become increasingly so many data, so many observations. Like we say in Norwegian, they have become empiri. And so this is not then about the future. It is about the present. It is about now. It's interesting to look at some crucial points in time. I would mention that before Hansen gave his testimony in 1988. In the early 1970s, in the USA, the Republican President Richard Nixon proposed a number of environmental laws. The Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and all of these were approved in Congress in the early 70s. In fact, not one senator, Republican or Democratic, voted against these laws. Today, the vote would have been very different. Either a large minority or a small majority of Republican senators today would vote against these laws. Do you see the paradox? Humans are not very rational beings. I say this, and I've, in a way, pulled the carpet from under my own discipline. I'm a professor of philosophy. Why do I say that we are not very rational beings? I have just given one example. I heard Lotte say, as I entered this room this morning, referring to the heat waves and the drought we have had this summer in Norway, in Sweden, and so on. And if I didn't get it wrong, I heard her say, referring to these events, so that even climate deniers have to give in now to the truth. We don't know how this drought, this experience with fires will play out, say, in the election in Sweden in 2 days. There have been predictions that these phenomena will give a boost for the environmental party, the Green Party in Sweden. But the biggest party, of course, may well be the Swedish Democrats, also the right-wing party, where the majority of voters are precisely climate deniers. Yeah, I think we have to ask some very tough questions that involve self-scrutiny, and that will be very unpleasant, uncomfortable questions to try and answer. Questions like, why did we do so little when we knew so much, as in my title for this lecture? That is a sort of question that seems very sensible. Children will ask that questions, as will adults. The question is premised on there being a strong connection between knowledge and conduct. So that presumably, if only we know about dangers, if only we are sufficiently informed about negative consequences, we will stop engaging in the kind of conduct that scientists, experts will say leads to these very negative consequences, which of course are as such undesirable. So on the one hand, there has been an increase in knowledge since 1970 or since 1988, and it will continue to increase the kind of scientific knowledge that Øyvind Påske's lecture showed us. So we know more, and we know with a much higher degree of certainty that there is this causal connection between CO2 emissions and the temperature that is rising as a consequence of these increased emissions. So we have this knowledge. It is readily available, and it's in the textbooks at school. So every pupil will be able to read about this from early on. Now, there is a tendency to talk about climate change as a catch-all. Øyvind Påske did that in his presentation, and I shall not criticize that. However, from my perspective, as another kind of scientist, as a humanist, as a social scientist, as a philosopher, also one doing psychology, sociology, I think that CO2 becoming this way of talking about the problem, talking about it in the form of giving numbers, showing graphs. Is fruitful only up to a point. It is fruitful, it is necessary, it is important, in that that's the way this kind of natural science is presented, is collected and is transmitted. So I'm not suggesting that we move away from figures and graphs. However, I think that the very fact that we have had this increase of expert knowledge on the one hand, and that this increased knowledge has been accompanied by an increase, by a growth in the problem, and not its reduction, points to some very clear limits when it comes to this kind of discourse, this way of presenting, talking about the problem. So there is a need to have the figures translated into another idiom, another language, if you like. Language is in a very broad sense, meaning. In order to really connect to ensure that the connection is made with human psychology. So I think that what we can see after all these years, there is a mismatch, there is a disconnect between the way of presenting the problem as paradigmatically done by the natural sciences and our responses to the problem as a culture, as a society, as so many individuals. And in saying this, of course, I'm very aware where I stand today and about you as my audience. So this translation, I would say, is the paramount task for all sorts of artists today. I have, in my own writings, tried to focus on experience. And there is, of course, a division of labor between those who talks about figures, the graphs, and the way I, as a humanist or social scientist, you talk about experience. So I think that the connect that needs to be made is a connection with human experience. We have to take in the data as something that is eminently concrete, as something that affects our everyday life. And even, to put it somewhat dramatically, as something that may very well endanger our everyday life in a not too distant future. Indeed, something that has already started changing that life in a dangerous, odious, ill-boding way. One concept that I have found very useful in talking about experience and in making this connection is shifting baselines syndrome. Another concept related to that is environmental generational amnesia. What is meant by shifting baselines syndrome? It's a recent concept, 2005, and it's that recent because the phenomenon it tries to describe, it wants to make us aware of, is just as recent. So the phenomenon that I will explain now didn't exist in this form, at least 1 or 2 or 3 generations ago. In fact, it never, as far as we know, existed in previous human history. It's novel. I quote from the psychologist Peter Kahn. We all take the natural environment we encounter during childhood as the norm against which we measure environmental degradation later in our lives. With each ensuing generation, the amount of environmental degradation increases. But each generation in its youth takes that degraded condition as the non-degraded condition, as the normal experience. End of quote. Now, you will be familiar with this notion, the new normal. That's one question to ask after this summer. Will temperatures like 35 degrees, 36 degrees be the new normal in the Scandinavian summer in the years to come? Will all these wildfires be the new normal, and so on and so forth? The psychology of this phenomenon is that we will pretty quickly, and sort of without noticing, drop the new. We will skip the prefix, and we will stick with the normal. So what was new is quickly not longer new, but normal, what we're familiar with. New generations will not be able to miss the animals or the trees or whole parts of nature or habitat that are no longer there when they are born and start their life trajectory. We do not miss what we have never experienced. What we have never seen, heard, or touched will not be conspicuously missing to us. The kind of losses I am talking about happen very rapidly, in accelerated, exponential manner. And they are to do with loss of biodiversity, loss of species, loss of land. Now, I want to move to a specific example. Flying. I think I wrote first about this in the newspaper that Lotte mentioned, Klassekampen, 13 years ago. And the title I gave my column then was No Fear of Flying. That's the book title, by the way, Fear of Flying. Since then, I think that was 13 years ago, since then we fly, as Norwegians, we fly more and more. So we're at the top when it comes to average flights per adult person. It's somewhere between 8.8 and 11 flights a year for each adult Norwegian in the average. Many fly a lot more. Some fly less or not at all. The estimate is that we will double the number of flights, and of course that's why they are expanding, always expanding, like at Gardermoen. They are doing that presently, and they just did. We could also take the example of plastics, and there is no need to explain the importance of that. You all know about that. The estimate is that the production of plastic products in the world will triple by 2050. That's the trajectory we're on. It will triple. Yeah. So in other words, we are doing more of things, activities, production of goods. That all this knowledge that we now have tells very unequivocally we should either do less of, reduce, or simply stop doing altogether. In a way, the problem we are talking about is so simple that a 7-year-old understands it immediately, but his parents do not. The solution to the problem is to stop doing what causes the problem. And we know what causes the problem. And to the extent that what causes the problem are so many human doings, so many human activities, it is, at least in principle, totally within our power to solve the problem, mainly by changing our ways. Why do well-informed, nice Norwegians fly ever more? It is to do with culture, it is to do with politics, it is to do with psychology. I could use my whole repertoire as a social scientist to illuminate why we do more of the things we should stop doing. For one thing, there is a culture of entitlement. That means there is a sense that traveling, seeing the world, is something that we have the right to do. And if someone should want to stop us doing that, they have no right to do so. It is to do with our freedom, our autonomy, our being grown-ups, completely able to decide what we do. And this is what we do. Nobody is welcome to criticize, let alone condemn, our deciding to do this. Now there is oil. We produce oil. We export oil. And we're sort of good at it. That's what we do, Norwegians. Today in the newspaper I read that the new Minister of Oil will increase production. He will in fact extract all the oil that it's possible to extract for Norway in the decades to come. He sees no good reason at all to stop this practice. He sees only reasons to continue doing it at increased and accelerated pace. This is 2018. Humans are not very rational beings. Yeah, we are very late. it would be, to put it too mildly, to say that there has been too little, too late, in terms of effective action. So we are very late. There have been a number of missed opportunities, like the Brundtland Commission in 1987 was a missed opportunity because of the way sustainability was presented. Sustainable development was presented as fully compatible with economic growth, the way capitalism likes it and depends on it. Fully compatible. The two are not compatible. They are in fact in deep conflict. The twin imperatives of capitalism, growth and profit, are busy killing the planet. They don't intend to stop and fetishizing the imperatives, but CEOs will say that I would have liked to do this, I would have liked to do that in terms of preserving the environment, but the constraints, the competition, the logic within the economic system that my company is part of forces me to increase what these scientists in fact say we should either reduce or stop doing. Another concept that I have been working with is eco-grief. Eco-grief is about acknowledging that as a society we have failed. As an individual, I have also failed. And for these failures, for which I am at least partly responsible, I feel regret. I feel sort of the weight of the losses that I have talked about. As a father, as a parent, I feel grief and regret that my children will live the rest of their lives on a planet Earth that is greatly impoverished as compared with how it was when I was young, when I was born. That's what we must say now about changes from one generation to the next. What changes must be depicted in terms of loss. I need to conclude, of course. I think that it is understandable that we want to think that when the problems become more real, then people who so far have been in denial will be so no longer. That's the point I raised at the very beginning, of course. I think we need to see that precisely because we have had this knowledge without acting upon it he has sort of been acting against the message of the knowledge. Because of that, there is a lack of innocence. We are implicated. We are parties to the problem, even to its growth within our own lifetime. So of course that would make for bad conscience. Bad conscience is an uncomfortable thing. We'd rather keep it out, not think about it, not take it in, pretend as if. And if we pretend that perhaps the problem isn't that big, acute, dangerous, after all, and even try and comfort ourselves that, well, what can I do anyway? How can I make a difference? Then that means that we invest our self-understanding, our identity, our sense of who we are. And most of these things we want to be able to look at as, okay, I am okay. What I have done is, by and large, okay. So we are biased in that direction. So, whatever the sort of rationalist scientific reasons for feeling bad, we are not ready to take that in. So I think that what we will see in the next years, if it sticks, that there will be more drought, more wildfires, it will be the new normal, and then it will be normal, is an increased polarization also in this area between those who are more and more alarmed, some even becoming activists like Jim Hansen, on the one hand, and others who have invested so much in these kinds of freedoms, these kinds of rights, being something that we are entitled to, having invested their whole identity in that, so that they will not want to give it up, regardless of the temperatures. Thank you.